I was about 15 feet out from the anchor and had maybe 15 more feet to go to get to the obvious route that we were going to continue up. And I just froze. I could not make a decision. And what I came to learn afterward was that I just had run out of capacity for complexity in my life.
Resilience is like a whitebark pine tree. When life tries to beat you down, you stand up strong in the face of adversity. As a formal definition, the American Psychological Association says that resilience is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. That's a lot of words to say that being resilient means that you can handle the relentless sun, the wind, and your own personal pine beetle infestation without giving up or sinking into destructive behavior. So what does that mean for those of us who like to go into the mountains? We know that being physically fit is important. But what about our mental fitness? Before each ski season, we're like maniacs, doing all those lunges and box jumps to the point where we can't even sit comfortably on the toilet. But are we willing to do something like burpees for our brain? In this episode of The Fine Line, we're going to step aside from our stories of rescues to do just that. But don't worry, these burpees will enlighten you. Our next conversation is about resilience and the importance of mental health as a backcountry safety issue. I'm your host, Matt Hansen, and I'm excited to introduce our guests for this show, Josie McKee and Hunter Lee. Josie McKee is a world-class climber, having more than 20 ascents on El Cap in Yosemite and having several speed records in the Sierra Nevada and Patagonia. For 3 years, she worked for Yosemite Search and Rescue, responding to accidents on the same big walls she was climbing. She has experienced her own share of trauma, having watched her climbing partner, Quinn Brett, take a 100-foot fall while speed climbing on El Cap. The accident left Brett paralyzed from the waist down, and McKee searching for answers as she continued her climbing career. McKee now lives in Lander, where she volunteers on the Lander SAR team, provides mental coaching for climbers, and works for the Responder Alliance, a training center founded by Laura McGladrey to help PERS responders build up resilience to stress and trauma. We spoke to McGladrey about her work in episode 41 of The Fine Line, and if you haven't heard McGladrey speak on this topic, I highly recommend it. Hunter Lee lives here in Jackson and is the founder of Flourish JH, which offers one-on-one coaching services as well as mindfulness and self-compassion workshops, particularly for athletes and other high performers. He is an International Coaching Federation member coach, a Reset-trained instructor, graduate of the 2-year Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Certification Program, and a graduate of Naropa University with a degree in contemplative psychology. He too has had his own journey of experiencing trauma. This past winter, he had 2 backcountry accidents in the Tetons, one that left him with a broken leg and another that saw his partner get swept away by an avalanche, though they were uninjured and able to self-rescue. He says the recovery from the broken leg was a lot easier than dealing with the stress of the avalanche. This conversation was recorded on May 9th. McKee had given a presentation on this topic the night before at the Black Diamond store in Jackson. We were able to wrangle her and Hunter into the KHL studio for a deeper discussion. Please stick around. My conversation with Josie McKee and Hunter Lee begins right after this. This is The Fine Line from Backcountry Zero.
This episode of The Fine Line is sponsored by Arc'teryx, a global design company based in the Coast Mountains of British Columbia, specializing in technical, high-performance apparel, outerwear, and equipment. For over 35 years, Arc'teryx has built trusted systems for points of critical need, inspired by athletes who are pushing the limits of possibility in alpine environments. Woven into the DNA of everything Arc'teryx makes are years of lessons from the mountains, trusted by mountain athletes and worn when it counts. Everything Arc'teryx does starts with a simple belief: the mountains make us better. Learn more at arcteryx.com.
I think to start off, if we could just have a couple of definitions. Josie, you spoke last night at the Black Diamond store about psychological first aid, stress injuries, and resilience. And you gave a couple of really good definitions about what is a stress injury, like, and how do we recognize what a stress injury is, and then how do we approach it?
Yeah. So what I always like to start off with is a little definition of what stress is and then how it becomes a stress injury. And I think mostly because I think we have a lot of preconceived notions around what stress is. But it's a physiological response in our body designed to help us rise to meet a challenge. So one of the signifiers in there in the moment is that it increases our heart rate so we can move good oxygenated blood through our bodies so we can fight or run away from something, right? The fight or flight response. And so that is a physiological response that's designed to last for just a few minutes, 10 to 15 minutes or so to really meet that challenge at hand in the moment. And then we also have a backup stress response system, which is a hormonal response designed to help us get through longer term challenges, also adaptive, also necessary for survival, but to meet things like if we have a famine, war, those kind of times when we don't have enough available resources and we need to be on alert because we might get attacked at any point. Now, in modern day and age, when most of us are not actually in survival situations on our day-to-day, that same stress response still kicks in for things that are not survival related, especially if we've been exposed to things that make our nervous system think that we need to survive and we need to be on alert. We can continue having that stress response day to day, and long term, the result of that is heightened levels of cortisol. I'll not nerd out too heavy on what's going on in the body there, but what it results in is us having that heightened alertness so we're not sleeping as well. The cortisol in the system can lead to things like heart disease, diabetes. It can cause us to decrease bone density, so we're more prone to injury. So it becomes this physiologic thing if that survival switch remains on long term. And that's kind of what we call a stress injury. And for a long time, all we had was stress in the moment, and then PTSD, which is a very severe stress injury. And as you mentioned, Laura has done a lot of work on this. It also stems from the military using this stress injury term, the stress continuum, to start identifying the steps along the way that build up to being stress injured as a continuum, as a progressive state that as you continue with and exposed to more and more trauma and stress, you can wind up with these longer, more intense stress injuries.
I'm hoping we can talk about how that stress injury and how that stress shows up in backcountry recreation. Mm-hmm. On this podcast, we talk a lot about accidents in the mountains, people who have made mistakes, and they often come down with a physical injury. Mm-hmm. And it seems like we're all pretty aware and well-versed in and comfortable talking about our physical injuries. Mm-hmm. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, how does that stress injury that you speak of show up in the backcountry, and how can we be aware of it to make sure that we can manage our stress so that we are prepared to go into the mountains and maybe not take it too far and make mistakes based on our clouded judgment, perhaps?
The stress continuum, which I mentioned, is an amazing tool for self-awareness, and it's a color-coded tool that was started to be utilized by the U.S. military as a combat readiness tool to assess where you are on a scale from green, ready to respond, ready to go be sent into combat deployed, to red, where you're severely stress injured. And then, there's all these kind of symptoms along the way that go into from yellow to orange to red. that are different for different people, but specific things that come to mind are, this disturbances in sleep, or are you getting a lot of really good sleep and then you're more in that ready state. Motivation for activities, so you can be really psyched, really aware of what your mission is, what your values are, why you're going and doing this, or you can start to realize that you don't really feel like doing it. You don't have the drive to do it. You might start withdrawing socially or stop doing activities in general. Those are some of the kind of basic things that pop into mind. There's tons of different ways that people present along that spectrum of injury. And then just to hit on those points about resilience, and I know we're going to get into it a little bit more, but that awareness as we start to recognize when we're feeling good and when we're actually stress impacted, trying to not go into more stressful situations when we're noticing that we're stress impacted, so that we can come back to that physiologic baseline and take care of ourselves, rest, recover, reset our nervous system so that we feel that we're safe, so our body knows that we're safe before we start adding more stressors. So that's kind of the basics of resilience there, is like creating these things that help us come back to green. And then psychologic first aid is kind of the other side of things, where this is what people can do for you, and you can do for yourself as well, after you've been impacted by stress or trauma. And there's like this event that happened, and here's some things that you can do to coax that nervous system back to green. And just real quick to hit on the psychologic first aid principles. So there's 5 that are out there in the world that we've adapted with Responder Alliance to have structure around, but this is very common language that's used, is establishing a sense of safety, a sense of calm, and that's something you can lend your nervous system to another person and help them breathe, help them relax. Connection, so human connection. Humans are social creatures. And that's actually maybe one of the most important pieces, I think, is being able to connect with other people. A sense of self-efficacy, that you have some capacity to do something to affect your own recovery or rescue from the backcountry. And then a sense of hope that things are going to get better. So those are the 5 psych first aid principles. So if we want to come back to them later, we can chat about those.
For sure. Hunter, why do you think that all of this matters for someone who's going out of the backcountry, like resilience and being self-aware of maybe being stress injured?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is kind of combating what for a lot of us is the culture around recreating in the backcountry. There's a lot of like, go harder, go faster, do more, be there first. And it's really easy to get swept up in that and put our own, well-being out of sight and out of mind. And, what we know is that when we go into the backcountry, when we go to recreate in these kind of high risk situations, if we are stress injured, we're more likely to make mistakes. We're more likely to be in a position where our judgment is kind of compromised. And then we're also more likely to be susceptible to long-term damage, right? And so in a culture that really prizes, getting it done at any cost, right? It's really necessary to start to like have this conversation. And I think what is really interesting about moving this into the recreator realm is that, when you're on a team, right? When you're on a team of first responders, even to some extent when you're on a team with other athletes, right? There's some level of accountability and like, okay, we actually have a job to do here. And we make sure that we're showing up to this with the highest level of performance that we can. But as a solo recreator, in a group of friends, right, there's not that same level of like accountability to performance that, you know, this sort of well-being is the foundation for. And so it really just goes by the wayside. And so I think that's why this conversation is really, really necessary.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the cultural aspect of being in a mountain town and recreating in the mountains with friends and with your peers, and even if we feel like we're stressed, perhaps there's that pressure that we feel either externally or internally to go out and do something, because if that's part of our worth, it's part of our identity, is to be able to go out into the mountains and do something cool with your friends. Yeah. But if you're not feeling it, how do you know that you should do something else that day, or just set it aside and keep going, keep pushing?
Yeah, I think that's super difficult because there's also a culture of coping with the mountains, right? And for some of us, like, that's a more healthy coping mechanism than ones we've had in the past, or ones that are kind of parallel in our lives at the moment. So knowing when, you know, this sort of coping mechanism becomes unhealthy is really crucial. But I think, you know, the tools that are supplied by the Responder Alliance, like, if you actually go through that with your partners and have other people hold you accountable to it as well, it's like, okay, you know, you didn't sleep very well. You're actually being a little bit reactive. You're a little bit touchy right now. Usually, you know, you're singing in the car on the way to the trailhead, and you're kind of quiet and head down. And, like, you know, I know you. I know what's in your life. So having other people hold you accountable, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, having that communication with your partners and with your friends.
Yeah.
Letting them inside, maybe, and letting them know what's going on in your own life.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. I think one other thing, I absolutely agree. That's probably one of the best parts of going out and doing these things as a community. The other piece that I want to add to that is spending time to really understand your own intrinsic motivations for doing things. Because I think it's really easy, like you said, to get caught up in this, like, culture of, we need to go send the NAR. Like, the goal is to summit the peak. The goal is to do this particular ski descent. And to remember that, like, that's not why you're really going out there. Like, we all have our own intrinsic motivators, some kind of passion and for what it feels like to be out there in the mountains and doing the thing that we love to do. And yes, it's great to accomplish those goals, but if you really notice, if that's what you're fixated on every time, then you're putting yourself at more risk. And if you can come back to those, like, oh, these are the reasons why I'm here, and we're just going out to have a good time and to enjoy those reasons, you're more likely to make good decisions in the moment.
Last night, Josie, you mentioned a phrase that I wrote down that I thought was sort of really telling, and you said it was the moment on the slab. Can you shed some light and, just for our listeners, explain how your personal journey kind of led you to this point with the Responder Alliance and you know, really diving into stress injury?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was, I was 20 up climbing and, like, started to explore big wall climbing and was so psyched. And when I got that job in the park, it was like a dream come true. And everybody, the culture there is like some of the best climbers in the world doing the biggest, raddest things all the time. And I had the opportunity to do those things, and I was developing the skills, the capability to do those things too, and could, you know, see myself doing all the hardest, raddest stuff. And so that's what the culture was doing to me. Like, I mean, I did it to myself too, but almost every time I went rock climbing, I was going kind of trying to find my edge, like pushing that line all the time. And then I was responding to people that had found that edge, doing similar stuff to what I was doing. Particularly the things that were impactful to me were climbers getting injured or dying, having, you know, accidents on the things that I was going out and doing. And also responding to other stuff in the park too. But it started to add up. And I didn't know it at the time, but the moment on the slab that you're referring to was a day we were out rock climbing. We were trying to put up a new free variation to an old aid climbing line, where, people had been pulling on gear to ascend. And I had to navigate across this blank slab that actually was not that difficult of climbing movement for me. I bet you, if people want to know grades, because sometimes people are wondering, like, I bet it was 5'9", and I could climb 5'12" at that point. Like, it was well below my ability. But there was no clear path, and it wasn't set for me. And I couldn't make a decision. I was about 15 feet out from the anchor and had maybe 15 more feet to go to get to the obvious route that we were going to continue up. And I just froze. I could not make a decision. And what I came to learn afterward was that I just had run out of capacity for complexity in my life. Like, I couldn't make complex decisions because I was overwhelmed. I was pushed into that point where my nervous system was just firing on this survival mode all the time. Luckily, my climbing partner was able to talk me down from that point, and I realized that, I was like dreading going rock climbing. I hadn't slept the night before very well. I would always have this like nervous, like knot in my gut every time I was going to go do something big. And I just didn't want to go. If I actually was honest with myself, I didn't want to do it anymore. But my identity was wrapped up in it. And I knew that I loved climbing, and I knew I wanted to keep doing it. And so I figured what was wrong with me was something in my fear of rock climbing. So I started working with a sports psychologist, because that was the answer. I didn't really think about therapy at that point. I didn't know any better. But luckily, and this is Chris Heilman was the person that I was working with, who's kind of local around here. I think she's in Driggs, so some of you might know her. But she really, she saved my life. Saved my climbing, but also just like put me on the right path in my life by asking me some questions that really got me to think. And one of those was really getting me to think about why I loved climbing. And I got to answer that for myself and find more balance in just finding the joy instead of always pushing on the hardest stuff ever. And I forgot what your original question was, because I'm just like going, but did that answer it?
It did, but like, did you scale back after that, after your conversations?
Yeah. So one of the things specifically that she asked me was, what is the most like joyous, playful form of climbing to me? And I was like, limestone sport climbing. It's so fun. It's like designed for our body to move on it. I swear, like limestone was grown for people to climb on it. And it's safe by, no climbing is absolutely safe, but the objective hazard in sport climbing is pretty much nil. Like, what's going to happen to you is if you make a human error. So pretty safe, wasn't putting a lot of risk into it, but got to do that fun, playful movement, which was one of the things that I had kind of defined as being a reason for loving to climb. And so then she asked me, she was like, all right, well, what's a good percentage of, fun, playful limestone sport climbing to these big, hard objectives that still inspire you, that like you're saying you want to keep doing? And I was like, At that point in time, it was probably like 90-10 in the like big, hard, scary being 90% of the climbing that I was doing, because I was living in Yosemite. And I was like, I bet it should be about reversed, honestly. And I don't remember what numbers I answered in that moment, but it was just an aha moment for me of like, oh yeah, I should be doing a lot more of this thing that's just pure joy. And so I moved to Lander, Wyoming, and haven't looked back. That didn't happen directly, but I did start spending more and more time in Lander as a result of those conversations that I was having with Chris. And spent so much more of my time focused on finding that joy, like really recognizing that feeling of what it is that I love and just trying to focus on just that until I had healed from my stress injury, basically.
I'm wondering if what we can tell people about maybe preloading for resilience training, where maybe if you are not stress injured, or if you're maybe questioning whether you are, based on different things going on in your life, if you're dealing with grief, loss, a physical injury, how do we sort of explain to people how they can build resilience in order to prepare for a moment on the slab, or a moment of loss, or something traumatic that happens to them?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I think, when you have the literacy around stress injuries, it's pretty obvious to look back and be like, whoa, I was in the orange in that moment, or I was in the red in that moment. But I think a lot of us spend a lot of time kind of between green and yellow, right? Like that's the day-to-day life stressors. Maybe work was hard today, maybe, whatever else. And, when you notice that you're having a hard time, right? This is bleeding into self-compassion a little bit, but the foundational question of self-compassion is like, what do I need right now? And can I give it to myself? And that's going to vary for everyone. And it's going to vary depending on what the circumstances are, but kind of really being able to get in touch with the difficulties that are going on in your life. Having an awareness that there is some level of distress, some level of stress, and then asking yourself, like, what do I need in this moment? And can I give it to myself? Right. And that may be human connection, right? That may be friends. That may be quiet time, right? That may be that I need to actually sleep in today and not get up and be the first one at the trailhead, or whatever your version of that is. And that's it's a process that takes time for a lot of people, right? If you ask yourself that question for the first time, odds are you're coming up blank. I don't know. I have no idea. But as you spend time sort of building the awareness around distress and difficulty in your life, and then continuing to ask yourself that question, the answers become more and more obvious each time. And so, what do I need right now is going to bring you back to the green, right? And being able to answer that question for yourself and become familiar with both your habits of what's happening when you move out of the green, and also what helps you come back into the green, is going to help you show up to distressing situations going forward.
Hunter, I'm curious if you can tell us kind of what brings you back into the green, and how you kind of manage that within your own life and in the mountains in particular.
For sure. I mean, I think when it's sort of day-to-day stressors and stuff, I'm a huge sucker for human connection. Right. And it's hard sometimes, because when I'm feeling sort of tired or burnt out or down or whatever, getting out the door and going to a social event is kind of difficult. There's a voice in my head that's it's going to be stressful. There's a lot going on there. You don't actually need that right now. But what I've learned is that by going to these things and interacting with people and being with people that I care about, people that care about me, it's been really helpful to kind of get me back from moments of stress and distress. And then when it's really, acute and severe, I reach out to mentors. I reach out to therapists. And I mean, my partner and I were involved in a kind of an accident on the South Teton earlier this year, where she got swept by some hang fire. And in the days after that, it was I've talked to my therapist, who I hadn't talked to in 7 years. And I reached out to 2 mentors, and I was I was asking them, what do I need right now? Right. At this point, recognizing the fact that this is a little bit out of my hands, a little bit out of my capacity to manage on my own, really reaching out to to professionals in some cases. And, you know, once I was able to take care of myself in that situation a little bit more, then I was like, I can go and objectively like look back at what happened on that day and maybe the things that went wrong and the decisions that were made that led to it. But the first thing was like, really, I need to like figure out how to get my nervous system back down because I can't deal with this right now.
Absolutely. And so Hunter, I'm just wondering if that incident has, like, how you're processing that incident and if that has influenced in any way your relationship to risk in the mountains.
Yeah, I'm still working through that. For the most part, a couple months after that happened, I got injured. And so I was sort of getting back into the mountains, slowly. And, you know, I did have mentors that asked me that question. It's like, what are you doing out here? What's important to you about this? And coming up with the answer to that, it's like, I can actually get that a lot by going and skiing dad pow, like with friends. That's what I'm looking for a lot of the times. And then there is times where it's like getting out and doing some serious objectives and having that sense of efficacy and accomplishment and experiencing awe and all that sort of stuff is really important. But, you know, I had really awesome mentors kind of ask me that question of like, what is, you know, there is risk that's you can't mitigate. And given that, like, what do you want to be doing here? And so that was like a really important question to ask. But yeah, once I brought my own nervous system back down a little bit, and that was a lot of talking to partner, talking to friends, sharing my story, talking to mentors kind of in the skiing world, but having the conversation be about my personal well-being first. And then after all that, like going back and looking at like what was going on leading up to that day, what was going on throughout the course of that day, what was going on in the minutes before this thing happened, right? And taking a look at kind of the technical aspect of what happened has been really helpful. But first and foremost, it was like, I need to take care of myself. And yeah, kind of showing up to myself with this, like, the parallels that I see between psychologic first aid and self-compassion. We have this common humanity piece in self-compassion. So I'll say there's 3 components of self-compassion. There's awareness of difficulty, right? You have to be aware that something really harsh is going on. The second component is kind of common humanity, like acknowledging that none of us are perfect, bad things happen. And then the third piece is kind of offering yourself some kindness, like showing up to yourself in that situation like you would a friend. And that common humanity piece for me has a lot of overlap with connection. Mm-hmm. And it's like you're connecting with the rest of the backcountry community when this happens. Like you're connecting with, you know, all of us have, you know, except for the lucky few, have like been in kind of a hairy situation here, and connecting with that community and acknowledging that like this happens, right? I'm not a uniquely bad person because I was in a tricky situation, right? Is really important. And then the kindness piece is like, that's safety, right? It's like showing up to myself and giving myself safety. What do I need to feel safe right now? And if that's difficult for you, like, what would you do for a friend in this situation? Like, how would you make them feel safe, make them feel cared for? And trying to like flip that and give it to yourself a little bit.
I love that so much. Before you even tied that to safety, I was thinking that.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I think a lot of us in these contexts beat ourselves up so much that we can't be safe with ourselves anymore because we're treating ourselves badly afterward. We think we made them. And it's a really common thing. It's the negativity bias, which is a natural thought pattern that we have to like focus on what went wrong because we don't want to do it again, but we go overboard with it. And if we can be kind to ourselves, then that's that first step towards safety.
For sure. And when I've done self-compassion adapted for athletes, they like add a 4th step on the tail end, which is like, now that, you've kind of showed up for yourself and cared for yourself in a way, then you want to look back. So it's like, we're almost kind of delaying that, hopefully constructive critical response until after we've taken care of ourselves, right? Because when we're really in it, we look back at that situation and we're like, I blew it. I messed it up. Everything was my fault. And like, you know, that can tank us. So kind of delaying that like evaluation of what happened until we're in a better space to look at it with, you know, a more clear-headed perspective, essentially.
I'm really curious because this is hard to do, right?
For sure.
Like it's hard to say, mind, don't go down that path.
For sure.
And I have my own thoughts about how I got to the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh yeah, you're not allowed to start spiraling down this negative, like what I did wrong pathway. Is there something that you help, you know, guide people to figure out how to do that?
Yeah, so I do specific like inner critic work with people, and I do it in my self-compassion workshops as well. And essentially, you know, the first step is realizing that the inner critic is the purpose of the inner critic is safety, right? So we acknowledge that that what it's trying to achieve is to keep us safe, right? Is to keep us safe from making mistakes again, to keep us safe from harming other people or harming ourselves again. So kind of getting in touch with what the motivation behind the inner critic is. And we want to like switch perspectives and take a look at what the impact is on ourselves, right? And when we understand that when we beat ourselves up, right, we feel hurt, we feel put down, we lose belief in ourselves. We start to fear the situations in which the inner critic comes out. And then, you know, we want to try and get in touch with this sort of wise, compassionate part of ourselves. For a lot of us, it's really difficult, right? It's a skill that takes time to build. So leaning on coaches you've had, mentors you've had, friends you've had, kind of being like, okay, what would they say to me in this situation, right? And trying to say that for ourselves. And then you get to the point where you realize that like the inner critic and then this compassionate, wise self have the same safety objective. And the inner critic will naturally the volume will naturally get turned down a little bit on the inner critic when you turn the volume up on this compassionate part of yourself, this wise coach part of yourself. And that's because it sees that someone is taking care of your safety, right? If there's no one else in the room, like looking out for you, it's really loud. It's like, this is my job. No one else is here. Like, I got to make sure we don't do this again, right? And if you have a really wise, compassionate part of yourself that really cares about you and wants you to succeed and wants you to avoid making mistakes in the future, right? It's not like, I love you, do whatever you want. No. And like, if you think about your friends, like you don't approach them with that attitude. You're like, I love you and I want you to succeed and I want you to not make mistakes again, right? And so we're just kind of turning the volume up on that one. And then the inner critic kind of will naturally step aside a little bit, right? And it never goes away. And it's, I'll save anyone a lot of time. It's a fool's errand to try and fully shut it up forever. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get it done. I'm sorry. But being able to be aware of it, understand that it has a purpose, and then, you know, can I turn up the volume on something that achieves the same purpose?
I love, for everyone listening right now, Hunter is physically turning dials in the air. And I think that that's a powerful visual along with the words that you're saying. Like, I can visualize doing that for myself. And I think when you're trying to do challenging mind acrobatics, like what you're talking about, also having something physical with it, and it's like, oh yeah, just visualize turning that dial down. The volume needs to go down a little bit. The volume needs to go up a little bit. And now I'm doing it with my hands.
Josie, can you share a little bit about your accident in Yosemite and then how you were able to deal with that inner critic, that negative response, and continue to climb in the aftermath?
Yeah. So I want to say that it's twofold of this accident, which I'll talk about a little bit more what it was, but happened after all of this work that I had already done to help mitigate the stress injuries that I had from working on SAR and pushing myself too hard on wall climbing. So I had a resilience foundation already pretty well established. I had asked myself what I needed. Like, I knew what I needed at this point. And then also the aftermath of it, the psychological first aid that was given to me were the two things that helped me recover. So, I don't like to get into too much details of the accident because I don't want to be traumatic and triggering to people listening.
Sure.
But my partner took about 100-foot fall and impacted a ledge. And luckily she survived. This was after I was on the search and rescue team, so I kind of knew all the processes pretty well and who to call. Got the ball rolling on this flight out. They short hauled her off with a helicopter. Got that going really quickly. And then Aaron Smith was still on the wall with me after she had flown off. And this is where the psychological first aid piece kind of started and then continued from there. But I was about ready to go start cleaning up the anchor that was above us. And just like immediately after she had flown off, and he was like, there's no hurry. Let's take a moment. And that was this establishing calm and safety for me in that moment. And then after we'd had a moment, chatted, had snacks and water, all the things, take care of myself physiologically, he was like, all right, how do you feel about going and cleaning up that anchor? And so I was like, yeah, I feel capable, and went up, cleaned that anchor. And then he asked if it was okay if I was capable of leading the rappels. So we were about halfway up El Cap at that point. So 1,500 feet and off the ground. So it's maybe a dozen rappels from there, give or take. I could probably count in my mind if I wanted to take the time to do it, but it's a lot of rappelling. And I thought about it for a moment, and it's really interesting because a friend of mine asked me last night after I had told this story. He's like, were you capable? Like, was it a good idea to put you in that situation? And I was like, yeah, I was. And I think Aaron assessed that. I think he knew that I was capable and probably knew that it was good for me to have some efficacy in the situation. So I led all those rappels while he had the big package of rescue. He had a bunch of equipment, so it was easier for him to follow the rappels with all of that weight hanging off his harness. And then we got to the bottom, and I was getting ready to just drive home. I was living in Mariposa at the time, about an hour from the park. And my former supervisor, Philip Johnson, was like, no, come back, come to my house. And I sat down and had tea at his kitchen table, and he just continued to calm me down from there and just listened. And I was about to drive home at that point, and he's like, no, I'm going to have the SAR site drive you back. So he got a couple of the guys that I had worked with prior, because this was only, I think, about a year after I'd been on the team. So I knew them really well, and they drove me back down home and just continued with that connection piece. And then, I got home and ate some more food, and my partner at the time, helped me, kept talking to me, and I was like, all right, I need to go to the hospital. And so then I went down to the hospital and got to spend time connecting with Quinn and with all of her loved ones as they were showing up at the hospital as well. So those were pieces of kind of in the immediate aftermath of creating safety, calm, connection, efficacy, and hope, all of those psychological first aid principles. And then as I was trying to come back to climbing, tapping back into my own resilience foundation, asking those questions again of what I wanted to get out of it, giving myself compassion as the first time I went climbing after that, I just went top roping. And even on top rope, I was crying. All I could envision at that point was watching her fall, but also like kind of watching myself fall in my mind's eye. And I was terrified, and just being like, it's okay. Like, it's a normal response to what you experienced, and if you want to come back to it, you can come back to it, but it's going to take time, and giving myself that time. So yeah, that was kind of the immediate aftermath. And then, it took quite a while. It took probably a couple of years, if I'm completely honest, till I was reasonably recovered from that. And it's still there. Like, there's elements of risk and things that I just won't do anymore. And I think that's okay.
Yeah. Showing up with that acceptance after something like that, I think, is probably really hard for people who have been in a serious accident in the mountains. Acceptance of maybe how your relationship with the mountains has changed in relationship with risk. And like you said, Hunter, it can take time, and maybe you don't have all the answers. And
I think that there's a degree of acceptance necessary in that stage as well, right? You can come to terms with, like, maybe you're 2 years out from something and you're like, okay, here's where I am now, and that's okay. But having some acceptance along the way as well, of like, I don't actually know what this means for me in this moment. I'm still processing. If it's a seriously traumatic thing, like, that's actually literally like working its way down your spine, like down your nervous system, and getting integrated and getting processed, and not knowing where you are in that process, is super important for kind of managing your decision making and your judgment going into the mountains. But B is also really important to understand that that's okay, and that's part of the process as well.
I love what Hunter said earlier about asking what you need right now, and I totally, it resonates a lot with me and the people that I've worked with, that answering that question doesn't make any sense right off the bat. But the more you do it, it's really just about self-awareness and defining your values for what you're doing out there and honoring those values. And the more you ask that question and try to answer it for yourself on a regular basis of, what am I doing? What do I need right now? Where am I at on the stress continuum, or how stress impacted am I right now before I go into the mountains? Like, the more it becomes this habit, the more you become aware of not just these words that you're saying, but what it feels like actually in your body. And I think that's something that, mountain athletes are usually pretty connected to their bodies. If they start tuning in, you can start to notice what it feels like to be in that right head space, nervous system space, or not.
yeah, definitely. How do we communicate these tools? So, like, if we do the work of self-compassion and resiliency and we're feeling good, but maybe our partner or backcountry partner is maybe not exactly in that same space, but you're going out anyway. This is something I wanted to ask you last night. Like, how do we help communicate? What are some of the tools that we can use to communicate this issue to the people who we go out in the mountains with?
I think that's a really important question, and it was something that I was curious about last night too. Not necessarily on the same, like, one-to-one, like with my partners sort of thing, but like in the community of friends that I have that recreate in the backcountry, there's like massively different levels of literacy around this, and also like whether or not people actually care. And I don't necessarily have an answer to this, but I'm really curious about the conversation around, like, how do we bring people in to this space that are a little bit resistant to it? And I could be off about this, Josie, but it strikes me that in like the responder community, it's like, actually, you're part of a team. So sit down, shut up, and learn, right? Like, you're doing this. This is part of your job. To some extent, obviously there's more and less resistance to it. But it's a really curious question for me, like in my community. And it seems we have, like, as human beings, we just like have a propensity to call people out for stuff. And it used to be like calling people out for making mistakes in the mountains. And now we're like calling people out for not being like emotionally literate. or like not, you know, and it's like, we're still kind of doing the same thing, but it's like, there's a different call out. So I'm really curious what you have to say about this. Because it's so important, and it feels like such a challenge to me to be like, if people don't care, is that just like, I guess they don't care.
Yeah. Well, at first, I think I want to address the responder community piece of it because I was just talking to somebody that was like, oh, yeah, we're just going to get the team to take these trainings. Like, it doesn't matter if they want to or not. And so, like, yeah, you can do that, but there's still resistance there from some people.
Sure.
I think it's getting better, though. And I always say that if there was one blessing that came from COVID was that we were collectively, as a human race, stress injured by it. And you know, we were lacking connection, which is one of those like core principles of psychologic first aid. And so we weren't recovering the way we needed to with this unknown. And so starting to talk about stress and stress injury became more relevant to people. I think it was just more deeply understood as a culture. So these conversations are easier now. And then I think going into the recreation side of things and the people you go out with, I always say approaching everything with curiosity is the easiest way to connect with people. And I bet that you'll learn something that, you know, they are emotionally literate in some way, shape, or form, but there's something that doesn't feel safe to them in the approach, like this standard common language approach to it. And the more you just start like talking and listening about these things on a regular basis, the more it starts to catch and bleed into culture. And as that culture grows and there's more people on the side of the group, like, you know, the scales shift to like, oh, it's 60-40 and then it's 70-30. And then that 30% are like, huh, maybe they know something over there and we ought to be listening. And then the other side to it is I would just say that like choosing partners carefully in the mountains. And if you're finding people that are consistently resistant to making good judgments in terms of both physical and psychological safety, like I cut those people out from either from my life or just from like, I'm not going to go do risky things with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and coming back to the culture piece, like I'm just picturing the Tiger Bradley Lake trailhead in the middle of the winter, like on a beautiful Saturday, and there's just like so many people there, and there's like this pretty big rush to get up in the mountains, and people are competitive about it, and they want to get there first, or they want to get their line, and you know, is there time or space to have these conversations, like in the car ride up, in the parking lot as you're getting ready?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing about Brad Tag that most of us hate is that we're going to be walking on the flats for a little bit, and like maybe that's the time where you want to insert this conversation of like, how are you today? Right? What's going on with you? And obviously, if they're people that we're close to, right, we have some insight into their lives. But yeah, hopefully there is, I mean, there's definitely time, right? And it's about how you want to kind of call people into that conversation. And, you know, I think leading by example is one way to go about it, is to talk about what's going on with you. And kind of ask your partners what's going on with them. And I think what you said, Josie, is really important, is that there's, you know, people aren't ignoring this for the most part, or aren't resistant to it for the most part, because they want to and they think it's like stupid or something, but there is something that feels unsafe about it. And whether that's something that's unsafe about sharing where they're at in this moment, sharing about the difficulties in their life. And, you know, again, the culture is changing, but, you know, if we grew up in a situation, or if, you know, we're sort of steeped in this idea that it's not okay to share these things, to talk honestly and be vulnerable, like it's going to be really difficult to open that door, and giving people time to do that is super important. But I think it's really hard because it's a risky thing to do, right? It's like, I want to make sure that, you know, people feel safe to move through this process in their own time. And yet when we make mistakes, the consequences can be really dire. So it's kind of it's a tough balancing act that I personally am still trying to figure out, of how to like bring people into this conversation and allow them to feel safe and move at their own pace. And also knowing that it's like, we actually, this could be really important, right? This could be the difference between coming home safely and not coming home safely. It could be the difference between knowing whether or not, my partner, my ski partner, my climbing partner is in a really tough place or not. And so, yeah, it's tricky.
And I think about this idea of just creating like it's what you do. It's like when you turn your beacons on and you check your beacons, you also check where you're at psychologically. And when you're tying in and, checking that your carabiner's locked, your belay device is loaded, your knot's tied correctly, like the standard safety check in there too. And the more it becomes just this like little thing that you just check on a regular basis, the more it's not really about like this deep, I have to be unsafe and talk about my deep emotions. I can just acknowledge, oh, I'm in a place right now where pushing the limit might not be the greatest thing.
I think, to kind of get us to a close, I want to talk some more about acceptance and acceptance of making a mistake, having an accident. And, we talk about that a lot on this podcast. And, how can we help people kind of find that place of acceptance where they don't feel shame about having an accident or about making a mistake, and they don't feel guilty for making an emergency phone call that requires a search and rescue response?
I mean, the first thing coming to mind for me is like, there also, I think, needs to be acceptance around the fact that we will feel shame and guilt, right? It's that not necessarily like getting rid of those things, but also normalizing those things for people, because that's part of we feel ashamed and we feel like we shouldn't is the big thing. And one of the paradoxes with shame is that it's like, it's a universal emotion that we all experience. And it's one of the most isolating feelings that we could possibly have. Right. It's this thing where we feel truly alone in whatever, I'm not good enough, or there's something wrong with me in this moment sort of feeling, feels incredibly isolating. And yet we all experience it. And so acceptance around like, hey, part of this process is that you're going to feel like you're not okay, that there's something wrong with you because of what happened. And by the way, that's okay. And you're going to feel guilty, right? And guilt is like, to some extent, is like a pro-social emotion, right? It's we've done something that has caused harm, and we don't want to go do it again. We kind of feel bad about it, right? And acknowledging that, like, hey, this is also part of the process, and that's okay. Obviously, both of these have an extreme end that we would prefer to avoid, right? That can be kind of crippling, that can involve silence, that can involve on the extreme end, like not making that phone call. But kind of acknowledging that this stuff comes up for everyone, I think, is really important, right? And it's like, you will feel bad about maybe decisions you made. You will feel bad. I mean, like one of the trickiest things is like, there's this shame of like not knowing. Like, I didn't actually know any better, and I should have. And it's like, how would you possibly know any better if you didn't? Like, there's nothing you can do like to go back and so having some grace around those feelings of shame and guilt, right? And sort of acknowledging that everyone moves through that as well. To me is what really stands out about that. It's like, I don't know how we can get rid of that. Like, if I had a magic wand and could wave it for people, I would love to. But while it's here for everyone, like acceptance around that and normalizing that is like, this is really difficult, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think just going back to that sense of value and why you're doing the things that you're doing, and knowing that if something bad happens, we're going to go into this shame and guilt place. And one of the things that we need in that moment is to find a way for it to be safe again. And to do that, we need to find a lesson in it, right? Like, that's what our brains are doing. Like, okay, how can I avoid this happening again? And if you know that you were doing things for the right reasons, and you know why you make the decisions you're making, it's a little bit easier to find the nugget of like, this is how to keep doing this thing regardless of the risk. And these are some decisions I'm going to make differently. And then I think the other piece to that is more education. I've been a wilderness medicine instructor for years and still do that a little bit. But I think the more you're prepared for incidents, the more you're going to have efficacy in the situation, both in the actual wilderness first aid component as well as in the psychologic first aid piece. Those things all give you a sense of efficacy and can give you answers of like, oh, I did these things the right way. And yeah, maybe there's some things that I didn't do exactly the right way, but like I can see what those are and I'm going to do them differently next time. It like speeds up that process of the guilt and beating yourself up, I think.
And I think what really helps, I think, so many people too, is having these open, honest conversations that can help us learn about how to move through the mountains safely and come home at the end of the day. And I'm just really grateful for your time here today. Josie McKee, Hunter Lee, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
For additional resources and information about the Responder Alliance, go to responderalliance.com. And to find Hunter Lee and his work, click into flourishjh.com. Thank you for listening to The Fine Line and to Arc'teryx for sponsoring this episode. This podcast is produced by the Teton County Search and Rescue Foundation as part of the Backcountry Zero initiative, which seeks to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries in the Jackson Hole backcountry. Our theme song is by Ann and Pete Sibley. The editing and sound are by Melinda Banks. The original cover art is by Jen Reddy. I'm Matt Hansen, and I hope you're able to find an easy path to being in the green. You can learn more about this program by visiting us at backcountryzero.com and TetonCountySAR.org. Long live the whitebarks and all of you. See you next time.